Hey everybody, good afternoon, and thank you for joining us for our webinar today. I am Susan Schimpf with the Wallace Center, and I'm delighted to be joined today by friends and colleagues at Red Tomato and Thunder Valley Community Development Corporation. These two extraordinary organizations will be sharing some of their innovative practices and strategies for empowering staff and training up new leadership within their organizations. So thank you to Michael Rozyne, Laura Edwards-Orr, and Ernest Weston for sharing your insight with the rest of us today. So earlier this year, we launched the Food Systems Leadership Network, of which many of you dialing in today are a part of. And we've had a great opportunity to connect with many food systems leaders out there across the country and really hear about what you're chewing on and wrestling with as you do your work. And we've heard a lot over this last year of interest about learning new or better ways of working and organizing and collaborating, both within our own organizations and in partnership with others. And since the Food Systems Leadership Network is focused on building our capacity to lead systems change, which is no easy task, and a big part of that undertaking has to be about improving the effectiveness of our organizations, we started shaping up a learning question that we wanted to explore through this webinar series. And really that question is, how might we infuse the same innovative and community-driven spirit that we bring into our food systems work and our programs into our organizations in order to really, manifest and live out our social justice values, improve the quality of our work, and really increase the quality of life for ourselves and our staff. Found this great Calvin and Hobbes bit that sums it up well, and basically, we've got to walk the talk. So today's webinar is the first of a series that's going to be digging into this question. The next one is going to be focusing on organizational structures, so alternative organizational structures. And the third is going to be looking at collective impact through network and systems leadership. So really this is an exploratory series to hear from our partners across the country who've been trying out new practices and in their own organizations and with their partners. So I think it's going to be a really great series. So we didn't have to look very far to find organizations that could help us dig and explore in these questions. And Red Tomato was, one of the key ones that we wanted to speak with today. So Red Tomato was built upon a set of core values around workplace democracy and fair trade. And Michael and Laura are here today to share the Red Tomato way with the rest of us. Michael Rozyne is the founder of Red Tomato, and he's been a marketer of small farm products for over 3 decades. Prior to Red Tomato, he co-founded the fair trade coffee company Equal Exchange, a worker-owned cooperative. And before that, he worked on conventional and organic farms in Maine and as a buyer and marketing manager for the Natural Foods Warehouse Northeast Cooperatives. Laura Edwards-Orr began her career in family farm activism with Farm Aid, where she staffed and managed a national farm crisis hotline, developed a web-based platform to connect thriving farmers with farmers in need, and penned a monthly consumer advice column, Ask Laura. At Red Tomato, Laura spent several years learning the ins and outs of the entire operation before stepping into the role of executive director in partnership with Michael in January of 2015. In addition to her leadership at Red Tomato, she is recognized as a 40 under 40 list of outstanding young leaders in the produce industry and serves at the UVM Food Hub Management Program Advisory Board, National Farm to School Network Advisory Board, and the Farm to Institution New England Network Advisory Council. So 2 amazing leaders with us today. It's a great honor to now pass the mic and the webcam over to you, Michael and Laura.
I just wanted to give a real quick background on Red Tomato before Michael and I jump into a story about leadership development here at Red Tomato. Red Tomato is a Massachusetts-based nonprofit food hub. We've been around for 21 years. We work with mid-sized produce growers and work with them to aggregate and brand their product into the wholesale market with a focus on chain grocery stores. One of the distinguishing characteristics about Red Tomato is that we don't own or operate any infrastructure. We work with existing parties in the supply chain to move our product to our customers. And our largest program is our ECO program, where we work with apple and stone fruit growers to certify their product as sustainably grown in the Northeast. And we're about 50% an apple company, which is somewhat ironic for a company named Red Tomato. So that's what you need to know about what we do. But when we were approached to do this webinar, the topic immediately resonated with both Michael and I, and we sort of see this story about leadership development through the story of our leadership transition at Red Tomato, which we've been at for quite a number of years at this juncture. So we wanted to share that story with you and use it as a framework to show how our organizational culture helped support that development over time. So,
all right.
Michael, to you.
Sound good?
Sound good.
Hi, everybody. If you were touring an apple orchard in the late 1950s when I was born, you would have seen about 75 to 100 enormous 40-foot trees per acre. Then, around 1980, close to when Laura was born, the apple density would have been semi-dwarf trees, which were planted 200 to 300 per acre. But if you go to one of our orchards today, you're going to see the modern ones in transition to dwarf trees planted 3 feet apart, sometimes as much as 1,000 or more trees per acre. And these trees are only about 6 to 8 feet high. And what makes this possible is actually the rootstock that they're planted on. All kinds of different varieties can be planted on the same, grafted on the same rootstock, and the rootstock reflects the character and the variety of that tree. Well, in similar fashion, Red Tomato is like a graft on the fair trade rootstock of Equal Exchange, a fair trade coffee tea company in Massachusetts that was born in 1986, and Red Tomato emerged inside of Equal Exchange. And so our organizational culture has really grown on top of the fair trade industry. So values like farmer well-being first, cooperation, workplace democracy. Equal Exchange is a worker-owned cooperative. These are the values that really started Red Tomato. And so it's no coincidence that our whole culture really has been an expression of, okay, so we're a 501c3 nonprofit. What does it mean when we take those values inside of a fair trade for-profit company and kind of rebirth them inside of a food hub nonprofit? So it was about 2008, 2009, and I was co-leading Red Tomato with someone named Betty McKenzie. And Betty decided to retire from the food hub and food cooperative world. And I was again on my own leading Red Tomato. And Laura had been there for a couple of years, but we never actually worked that closely together. So I was regrouping, trying to get a sense of the whole staff. We're a pretty small staff. And so one day I asked Laura to come in and just talk and tell me more about her aspirations. And I asked her, so who do you want to be in 10 years from now? And she got very serious. And she kind of looked up and she said, I need a day on that one. I'll get back to you. And sure enough, a day or two later, there's a knock on my door and Laura comes in and she says, I've got an answer for you. I want to be the executive director of a small nonprofit agency working on things that I really care about. So I kind of said, okay, you've been heard. Thank you. Note taken. And from that day on, we began to work more closely together in all kinds of ways. One, we were beginning a 5-year long-range strategic planning process, and Laura volunteered and stepped up to join the Plan to Plan committee. And here's a relatively new employee stepping up, and from the beginning, I could see that she was very willing to stick her neck out, take lots of risk, and be bold at the same time that she was really listening carefully. So I began to take more and more mental notes. We also worked together on fundraising. Fundraising had been a particularly thorny part of recent history at Red Tomato. And 3 of us set up a fundraising committee to replace what had been a full development department that we dismantled. And in working with Laura really closely, I began to see her as a relationship builder and as a project manager and as someone who just took a ball and ran with it and held it, and yet still was a really good team player. So I was taking all kinds of mental notes. And a few years later, Red Tomato transitioned its locale from inside of an industrial park to a much more kind of romantic place onto a farm in southeastern Massachusetts. And about the same time, one of our key advisors kind of took me out for lunch one day, and she had been a coach to many of the Red Tomato employees. Her name's Michelle Chambers. And she said, you know, you might want to take note that you've got some pretty hot SH blank rising leaders in your organization, and they're going to want to keep growing. And if you don't have a place to put them, you could lose some of those people. And there were two in particular that she had in mind, Laura and Angel Mendez, who had been with Red Tomato a long time. And that kind of hit me hard, and I began to think about that for a long time. And really, the conclusion that I came to was that the transition beyond my leadership as executive director, and I had been that at this point for about 16 years since the founding of Red Tomato in '97, I realized that, you know what, this actually shouldn't hinge on my age and my timeline. This needs to hinge on the successor's timeline. And what's right for them is probably what's right for Red Tomato. And a couple things about that, I have a very strong internal bias toward succession done internally rather than hiring the external candidate. I had watched several nonprofits go through long national searches, one run by a search company, and it was a painful process to watch from the mezzanine. These were people that I knew, friends of mine, and I just developed a strong bias toward an internal replacement. And the other thing was that I had always felt that when I get to know someone and I can understand when they're in the work zone, then we have such a better chance of really utilizing their full talents and making that person way more productive. So I put all of this together and began to think about the leadership succession that would replace me. Laura, baton passed to you.
I'm sure people are not on the edge of their seat because our bios have already been read. Let's see. Trying to advance to the next slide here. Oh, here we go. And now I might have, yep. Okay, so it was a great introduction. So I'll just pick up the story in the beautiful romantic setting that we're in now. And it was a regular day at Red Tomato. I don't recall what else was happening. And Michael sort of approached me with a sort of bizarre level of intensity and was like, do you want to go have lunch outside? I was like, okay, that seems like a good idea. We went out and sat at this picnic table, and for anybody who's been proposed to, there's sort of a few moments in your life where a very serious question lands in your lap, and this one felt very much like that, where we got into it relatively soon, and Michael suggested, you know, what would you think about being the executive director of Red Tomato? And didn't really feel quite fair to be like, let me sleep on it and get back to you like I did in the original conversation. But we sort of said, oh, okay, you know, what does that mean? What does that look like in practice? And we started to explore a multi-year leadership transition with a couple of years leading up to the transition, and then probably a couple of years after the title was officially handed off, to fully complete the transition, and that would be done in partnership with Angel Mendez that Michael introduced earlier from the seat of the Director of Operations. So with Angel running the Finance and Logistics Department, and with myself running the food hub sales and purchasing and fundraising, HR, and all of those other traditional functions. So we sort of explored it. There were a lot of questions that weren't resolved yet. And I did take it home to sleep on it and have a conversation with my family. And I arrived relatively quickly at the decision that there really wasn't a better opportunity out there to do the work that I wanted to do and have the kind of impact that Red Tomato has on mid-sized farms in the Northeast. And a challenge like this wasn't going to drop in my lap again anytime soon. So I sort of enthusiastically said, what the hell, let's give this a try and see what happens. And so we embarked on a relatively linear process. We sat down with our board of directors. We got permission to embark down this road. We had a roadmap that we worked on with our planning consultant and our management team. We got approval from the board to proceed. We did an organization-wide assessment of both my capacity and Angel Mendez's capacity, where there might need to be additional training and professional development. The entire organization participated in that process, and we gave the results of our professional development plans, leading all the way up to an interview with the board of directors leading up to the transition. So that took about 2 years. And then I officially took the title. It's funny how these dates don't really stick very well, but I think it was 2014, and have been doing the job since. And I think our guess that it was going to take 2 or 3 years for it to feel like the transition was complete was pretty accurate. So you all are seeing Laura and Michael sort of settling into their roles after many, many years of working on this transition. But I wanted to say a little bit about sort of how this felt and how the culture at Red Tomato supported the transition, because I think that's been critical. There's not a ton of literature about founder transitions, successful founder transitions, particularly when the founder stays on. And I think what made this undertaking possible was the culture that Michael had built at Red Tomato and the opportunity that I was given to augment that culture. So of workplace democracy and continuous improvement, and sort of having the process be the work itself. And so our leadership transition was very much out in the open, when it was working, when it wasn't, when things were hard, people were at the table. We were using our coworkers to help us figure out how to navigate those challenging moments. But it wasn't insignificant to think about taking on, filling a pair of very visionary and very public shoes in the food system space, looking at the differences in our generations and their relationship to work. So the upcoming generation that I'm on the cusp of places a much higher priority on work-life balance, and I had young kids at home, and I really wanted to figure out how to take on this job and maintain a healthy lifestyle. And so that became a conversation at Red Tomato. How can we make sure that we're working with our entire team to foster good work-life balance, to use the visionary shoes that we have in our midst and develop our own perspective and capacity to lead at the same time. And through those conversations with the team and with the board of directors, it really became clear to me that rather than trying to be Michael or fill Michael's shoes, which would be an impossible task, really my leadership at Red Tomato was about helping the organization transition from an entrepreneurial startup organization to a mature organization that was both doing the work on behalf of its mission and also serving this function of training new leaders coming up into food systems, so that we were modeling that with our leadership, but also building that concept of training and development into how we were working with our staff so that we could continue to bring people up the line.
And so, is this right time, Laura?
Yeah, jump right in.
That literature that Laura referred to is kind of depressing. When founders try to stick around, more often than not, it just doesn't work. So my job switched from supervising much of the staff to supervising no one, and instead assuming the role of coach, which I have to say I am naturally better at than supervising. Laura's a better supervisor and HR manager than I ever was. But I give Laura a lot of the credit for owning the full responsibility and being a strong leader without letting her ego get in the way of things. And I would give the same credit to Angel Mendez. And the hardest thing for me nowadays is actually figuring out when to stay in the game and be at the table fully with my voice and my opinions, or when to shut up and to get out of the way and to just be a listener, not to walk away, but to be present as a listener with maybe a small quiet comment instead. And I'm always juggling those two. And there's a nice metaphor that I garnered from Zingerman's, the natural food deli in Ann Arbor, who does an awful lot of HR, organizational development training. Laura has been studying with them, and she turned me on to a metaphor that I'll leave with you, which is about how to be a learner. And they have 4 states of being a learner. One is unconsciously incompetent, when you're not aware of what you can't do and what you're doing wrong. Second state of learning is to be consciously incompetent. You're gaining awareness of what you're not doing well. The third is to be consciously competent. And that is the best place from which to teach. And then the fourth state is to be unconsciously competent. Someone who is just naturally really good at what they're doing, but isn't aware of what that means, and you can't really teach from that spot. And the metaphor really helped me try to think about where I am at different times. So Laura, why don't you finish up?
All right. So I think we're very close to time. So I have this last slide here, but I'm just going to speak extemporaneously for a bit about where we have room left to grow. So for both Michael and I personally, but also in this quest for an organizational culture that really supports leadership development across the entire team. And I am struggling advancing my slides. So I think that we have clearly invested very heavily in tools and processes, and we have coaches to help us support this. But one thing that we've learned, we've done a personality profile tool called DISC, which sort of gives you an insight into the natural work style of the people on your team. If folks are familiar with Myers-Briggs, it's a similar tool, a little bit more in depth. Both Michael and I have very, very similar DISC profiles. It won't surprise people to know, and I think that's part of what helped us navigate this sort of uncharted territory. But it also sort of, it puts blinders on the two of us, because we say, you know, we invite everybody to the table, we give everybody the opportunity to participate, we fully embrace workplace democracy. And what we're learning now as we're bringing a more diverse staff to the table with varied levels of education across race, across gender, across the generations, that we really need to offer additional layers of support so that folks who have different work styles feel empowered and have the tools they need to participate with two very opinionated, finger-pointing leaders around the table. And that requires slowing down, and it requires investing in training. It requires accommodating different learning styles, whether it's writing or auditory. And the places where we're really seeing that now, as Red Tomato is looking out and understanding the market context that we work in, chain grocery stores, is changing really rapidly. We're having to do some pretty intense strategic planning to figure out how we can be more resilient and responsive in the market. And that framework of strategic planning that I really thrived in my early days at Red Tomato isn't the comfort zone it is for everyone. So we're really trying to figure out how we can do better by the team to bring people in, empower them, create a framework of trust and candid feedback that everybody from across the spectrum can participate in and offer their best to make Red Tomato stronger and more resilient. So I think that's a place where we've done quite well, and we have a lot more work to do. And it never feels like a destination or a box we're going to be able to tick off, but one that we have to constantly be modeling and investing in, asking questions, and looking for constructive criticism from our coworkers. So I think that's the end of our piece.
Awesome. Laura and Michael, thank you so much. Y'all are quite a dynamic duo, so I'm really grateful for you sharing the transition journey with us, and look forward to digging in a little deeper during our discussion. So a spark of inspiration for this series really came from a dinner conversation with our next presenter, Ernest Weston from Thunder Valley CDC. It was during Policy Link's Equity Summit earlier this year, and that night Ernest shared his organization's philosophy about staff empowerment and leadership development, and we were all really hungry for more, so now we get to hear him out. So Ernest is a member of the Oglala Sioux tribe and was born and raised on the Pine Ridge Indian Reservation, and he is currently the program coordinator for Thunder Valley CDC's Food Sovereignty Initiative. Ernest found his passion for recreating, re-identifying, and rebuilding a local food system in his tribal community after studying abroad in China in 2015, where he learned about China's agricultural industry and local food systems. With research and experience in gardening and community building, Ernest recognizes the importance of community-driven projects and movements that strengthen tribal sovereignty and creates healthy communities. Ernest, take it away.
Thank you, Susan, and thank you to the participants. Like you've heard, my name is Ernest Weston. I'm from Porcupine, South Dakota, which is located on the Pine Ridge Indian Reservation. And I am the Food Sovereignty Education Coordinator here at Thunder Valley. And I will dive right into my presentation. Oh. Maybe. Okay. So just to give some background on Thunder Valley, we are a Lakota-ran grassroots community development corporation, and we're building a community as a catalyst to create systematic change within the Pine Ridge Reservation. And we are focused on building power for our community to create sustainable change and end poverty on the reservation. And we do this through a multifaceted approach. Thunder Valley was founded in 2007. Yes, 2007. And so we're, over a decade years old now, and we have a lot of experience. We went from 3 employees to over 60 in 3 years, so a lot of growth. Currently, we are working to create a 34-acre regenerative community on the Pine Ridge Reservation, and through that, we established nine programs within Thunder Valley. And you can see the quote there about Thunder Valley from one of our employees. This is a show me place. People have to see it to believe, and I'll reconnect to that later. All of our work is place-based and comprehensive, centered on applying Indigenous innovation in a way that honors our culture, heritage, and is adapted for the needs and vision of a local community, our local community. So our mission at Thunder Valley is to empower youth and families to improve the health, culture, and environment of our community through the healing and strengthening of cultural identity. We have 9 different programs, and the program I work for, of course, is Food Sovereignty Initiative, and so the others are youth leadership development. All the work we do is focused and based around youth in our community. Lakota language revitalization, home ownership, workforce development, social enterprise, regional equity, arts and culture, and community development. And I just have to note that currently in a transition from the Food Sovereignty Initiative to our social enterprise, and I'll explain a little bit more of how that works. So at Thunder Valley, we create an ecosystem of opportunity, not just for our community members, but for our staff and employees. we develop a comprehensive, innovative, and grassroots approach that is based around Lakota values and beliefs. And this ecosystem of opportunity that we create here, each piece that goes into it's deliberate. We want to improve the health, culture, and environmental aspects of our community, and in a way that strengthens our cultural identity. And a lot of what we do here is, based around one philosophy. Most of the time it comes down to this one philosophy of being a good relative. And I'll explain that a little bit more. So being a good relative here at Thunder Valley, like I said, we went from 3 employees to over 50 in 3 years. And currently we're over 60. And during the summer months, we employ over 100 employees and about 25 summer youth employees as well. And so to dig deeper into, we talk about being a good relative. That's something that each and every one of us grew up with. We're instilled at a young age since the time we're able to walk and talk, we talk about being a good relative. And that is, one of the frameworks that grounds all the work that we do. Here at Thunder Valley, we just, went through a leadership change. We have a new executive director. We had that search for well over a year, and a lot of work went into that from not just our leadership team, but every employee was a part of that process. And so when we talk about being a good relative, if you see here, my little bubble map I made, we talk about being a good relative in terms of being a good relative to Mother Earth, being, a good relative to the four-legged, being a good relative to the winged, being a good relative to the plants. In the middle of all that is the people. And, one of the larger pictures here is we want healthy communities. And so we need to be healthy relatives to each other from person to person. And, like I mentioned a little bit ago, we went through this executive director change, and we had a lot of feedback. It was a national search, and, a lot of the community members were involved in that as well. So involving community and employees is a big part of what we do here, and especially the youth. So to dig deeper into this being a good relative framework, here at Thunder Valley, we're not top-down organization. We're, everybody's on equal playing field. And to make sense of that, I guess for myself, I talked about, the self-leveling mechanism and how we as employees, as, our leadership team, how we all, hold each other accountable. And a part of that value of holding each other accountable is humility. And, we're taught culturally to be humble. Humility is a big part of our culture. So we hold each other accountable, and we have open conversations in doing so. Another part of that is Kielspay, which is, a Lakota word for how we organize ourselves in community. And our work organization, our community here at Thunder Valley, we, are a smaller piece of the whole. And so Kielspay means a smaller piece of the whole. And in that, that's how we foster community, and that's how we foster this healthy work environment we got. So coming back to being a good relative, it's not, we're taking it a step further from the natural world and turning it to our work environment of creating community and being a good relative to our coworkers. And there's a quote there at the bottom by Ella Deloria, who she's a Dakota writer, and she talks about being a good relative and how in our communities that, we should never be afraid because our relatives are always taking care of us. And so at the bottom you see there, I'm not afraid, I have relatives. And that there is how we at Thunder Valley, create community in the workplace. And so looping back around to this executive director change, it was a national search, and Thunder Valley is a Native-led organization. So our pool for executive director candidates was already small because, you know, one of the requirements was for this person to be Native. And so that shrunk it very, very, very quick. And so to truly be a Native-led organization, you know, we wanted somebody who, well, of course, was American Indian, who was familiar with tribal community and who's familiar with nonprofits. And so the search started last fall and went out to a national search, and there was, you know, quite a bit of applicants, but it was, you know, weeded down to a handful of finalists, and that's where the employees at Thunder Valley, you know, were included. They were included in the interview process. There were panels set up. We had the finalists come to Thunder Valley and do tours with all the 9 different initiatives, talk with, you know, the program coordinators, talk with the directors. And so that inclusive environment of including everybody in this big decision, that, you know, that's the kind of environment we want for all our employees at Thunder Valley. So that was, you know, part of the inclusive decision making, because here at Thunder Valley, you know, we believe that, you know, our strongest asset are our people. And within that, we also talk about creative placemaking. And for us, when we talk about creative placemaking, we talk about creating champions within the community. We talk about, you know, how do we have successful transitions for, you know, different positions within Thunder Valley? How do we have a successful search for executive director? Our outgoing director, this was his baby. He worked 12 years to get this up and running, and now we have, you know, this executive director change happened, and in the process of it all, you know, we talked about how is this going to affect employees. You know, this new leadership that, you know, none of us are used to is going to change, and how is that going to change the work environment? But really, it didn't change because the person we selected aligned well with our values and aligned well with our mission at Thunder Valley to empower youth and families. And when we talk about empowering youth and families, we're also talking about our employees as well. And so how that happens is, you know, we take people from the community who want to do this work, who want to do meaningful work and make their community better, and we invest in them. When I came on board with Thunder Valley a year and 8 months ago, I was out of college. I didn't know nothing about joining the workforce at home, and I had this opportunity show up, and so I applied to Thunder Valley to be a program assistant. And within the first year, I was giving presentations in front of large crowds, which, you know, is hard for me sometimes. I was given, you know, all the opportunities I could to create the capacity within me to grow me into a leader. So we call that champion making within the community. And another example is, you know, we had a position open up in our food sovereignty initiative. And so unfortunately, Pine Ridge Reservation has a workforce development problem. You know, we could have all the jobs in the world here, but to have a person, an individual come and know their capacity to hold a job, you know, to have transportation, to have this hard skills, interpersonal skills, you know, all those skills that go into making, you know, somebody a you know, employee of a place who wants to do meaningful work. And to us, that's that workforce development problem we're trying to address. And that's why we take the approach of making champions within the community. And we also have a workforce development program where we take youth from the community and give them all the skills they need, give them the hard skills of learning how to build the homes that are out on site. They're building 21 homes, and they learn all the construction skills with that. But the other piece they get is if they need to finish their GED, if they need to enroll for college classes, they get the emotional intelligence part. All those other parts that go into holding a job and maintaining a job that nobody talks about, those are the parts we focus on and build. So we invest in our own to build capacity. And to us, that's, that's creative placemaking. And Thunder Valley is very diverse. I want to note that. If you look here on the slides, about 82% of the employees here are Native American, and that even breaks down into different tribes. So there's 586 federally recognized tribes in the United States. South Dakota alone has 9. So to be American Indian or Native American, there's over 500 options within that. And we even have, a large part of our workforce is, 14% white or Caucasian. So in this sense, if looking at the number breakdown, we're pretty diverse compared to other organizations within the reservation, which may be full Native. Even though we have this diversity, which in my opinion is a lot of diversity, we are still Native-led and Native focused on, providing capacity building for the reservation. So going back into this leadership change, I think I've heard somebody tell me one time that you have a true institution if your leadership's able to change. And we're a month into our new leadership change, and honestly, I haven't noticed any real changes. Nothing really visible. As a matter of fact, I think everybody is excited to do this work. With the new leadership, there's everybody's re-energized, and some of the practices that we adopted here at Thunder Valley for creating a healthy work environment is every morning we have the opportunity to come together, what we call morning circle. And in that morning circle, we smudge with sage or sweetgrass. And we go around the room and everybody has the opportunity to talk about something they're thankful for. And everybody gets to share what they're thankful for. And we start the day off in a positive way, and we pray and smudge. And that, for a lot of us who come from that practice at home, outside of the workplace, we just adopted that to create that, tighter community with one another and to be thankful in the workplace. And to us, that's the cultural piece that we incorporate. Another thing that, we do as an organization is, we take the opportunity and the time to remove ourselves from the workplace and have a staff retreat. We usually have ours up in the Black Hills, and that's a time for us to reflect, to be energized again, to talk about strategic planning, to talk about our roles and how we want to grow in our roles. So everybody at Thunder Valley is seen on an equal playing field. And that, that gives us opportunity and space to talk about our needs, talk about our wants, talk about our concerns, and, be critical of our positions, our supervisors, our, leadership. And that's that space that, we want to have. We want to have that space where we can have dialogue. And so the opportunity to do that in a staff retreat setting, plus in prayer and, in a circle, we do that so we're all open. And I think on the previous presentation, you talk about vulnerability, and Brene Brown does a really good job with that. We talk about vulnerability and letting ourselves be vulnerable, and that's that space and time we do that. Another practice that we do is evaluation. We have a whole evaluation team We do that through Salesforce. That's a big tool that we use, and we evaluate ourselves, we evaluate our peers, we evaluate the organization, and that diversity snapshot that we've seen previously, that was an evaluation of, who the workforce is at Thunder Valley. That's the first step to, looking at ourselves and really being honest with who we are as an organization, who our employees are. Another step that's being taken right now is looking at the gender pay gaps, if there's any within the organization, and how do you have the conversations to find a solution to these. And a lot of it is, we have to look and take care of our employees. We have to create this ecosystem of opportunity where we could grow within our positions. And a lot of the employees here, they've moved up in different positions because they had the opportunity, they had the tools, they had the capacity, and they had all the training given to them, and that allowed people to grow in their position and to be the best they can be for their position. And a lot of people outgrew their position too. Some of the, I should say, not so best practices is, there's a reason we have policy, and our policy is always being looked at, being evaluated by our board of directors, and we always have conversations of how do we operate in tribal community, who do we operate for, and how do we do that. Those are the questions we're constantly asking ourselves. Are we being fair to our employees, and how are we transparent to the community? And so we're always about being open with each other and with the other employees. And so I hope I didn't go over time. Okay. And a lot of this is being accountable to each other. And in tribal community, we talk about that self-leveling mechanism, which I think today got appropriated to crabs in a bucket, but that self-leveling mechanism was a tool that we use in tribal community to keep each other accountable. And a part of that is humility. And so those are some of the ways that we encourage leadership at Thunder Valley. We create leaders within the community, and I think we're unique in a lot of different ways. We're a very large organization at this point with over 100 employees. During the winter months, that goes down to about 60 to 70 employees, and we're constantly growing. So within this 34-acre, 10-year, $60 million plan, there's a lot to learn. A lot of the work we do is brand new to tribal community. A lot of these positions we create are brand new to tribal community. So we're constantly learning, we're constantly growing, and we're constantly evolving and trying to understand how do we do this better. We want to take all this work that we do from all the different 9 initiatives, and we want to be able to replicate it across all of Indian country, especially our food sovereignty work that is, we have a 2-acre demonstration farm with, 500 chickens. That takes a lot of work. And I think, we're realizing that to have a 2-acre demonstration farm, that's not a 8-to-5 job. That's a way of life. And so we're constantly learning and growing. And so for me, this is my perspective from a program coordinator's position. This is my perspective on the organization I work for. And I'm very, very grateful for this opportunity, and thank you all for listening. I think that's the last slide.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Ernest. Really appreciate you sharing just the Thunder Valley way and the Lakota way with us. So we have some time to dig into some Q&A and discussion this afternoon, which I'm really looking forward to because we have 2 really different organizations with really different approaches to leadership development and type of work and such, but I think that there's some real commonalities here that we can explore too. So just real quickly, I want to show you how the Q&A goes. Just to remind you, you can enter in questions here in the questions box. So please specify which panelist you are addressing your question to, or if it's for the whole group. And if all the presenters want to go ahead and get their webinar webcams turned back on, then we can have a conversation together. And one thing that I just kind of wanted to kick off is, you know, something that y'all brought up in both of your presentations is around like a real deep intentionality with your leadership development within your organizations. I mean, there was a lot of time and energy that went into the leadership transitions and, you know, developing out your frameworks for how you want to work with each other and such. And I know, you know, we're always so stretched for time and funds to be able to do that kind of internal work. And so I'm just wondering if you could share with us any, like, what strategies have you used to make space and time for that? How do you prioritize that within your organizations? Because I mean, what I see is everybody's like, we got so much work to do, we can't focus on that internal piece. And what you're telling us is just how important it is to put time and attention there. So maybe just a way of kind of getting us kicked off.
Well, I think it was great, Ernest, that you mentioned staff retreats, because I think that, you know, just structurally making time for some of this work is important, sort of lays the foundation for building it into the day-to-day. But clearly that isn't enough. So at Red Tomato, I think the leadership transition aside, I think we made time and space for that because it was because it had to be successful, and so that was just a required. We needed to make time to figure out how to make it work. But in terms of developing the rest of the staff, I've tried to find ways to build it into the weekly or daily schedule of what we're doing. So, for example, facilitating our staff meetings. It's something some people are super comfortable with and some aren't. So we rotate every month who facilitates the staff meeting and who organizes the agenda and does that work, so that we look at opportunities to, sometimes we have 2 people managing an account or 2 people working on a grant proposal, which might not be the most efficient use of time on a short term, but in terms of long-term productivity and training the folks, we see a lot of returns on a longer horizon. So I think those are a couple different ways, just trying to figure out how to build it into the weekly schedule so that it's not something different. It's part of the work that we're doing and the way we're doing the work.
Thank you. That's a great example. Ernest, from Thunder Valley's point of view, are there ways that y'all are integrating that into your daily practice that makes it kind of a lighter lift?
So there's a few different ways. One of them, when our executive director transition happened, we had this new person on board, and we had what we called executive director boot camp. It was a 2-day crash course on everything Thunder Valley, from the mission to its founding white paper to strategic planning, and, you know, playing with our mission statement too, to what it could mean for us today and tomorrow. And so we had a 2-day executive director boot camp. We try to work it in more. I know our leadership team does a real good job about this. Every Friday they meet to have a debrief in the afternoon, and that, you know, gives them time to talk about exactly, you know, how do we do this better next week? How do we, you know, incorporate this into everybody's daily work schedule? For the most part, you know, Monday morning meetings, all staff meetings required, and then after that, the rest of the week, you know, every time is broken down for each initiative to do their own thing, because there's 9 different initiatives and over 60 employees, so there's a lot of work going on. And to keep making sure everybody's doing their work, you know, we do take the time to reflect. And like I said, we create the environment to where we want to be, and allow others to speak up and use their voice in a respectful way.
Great, thank you. Michael, we got a question directly for you here. If you could speak more about workplace democracy and what does that look like in meetings and in decision making?
Okay. I just wanted to add one thing to the last question, though. Inspired by the Food Solutions New England Race and Equity Challenge, we adapted a practice at Red Tomato that worked somewhat well. We began to add something into our meetings, which we call "Who Am I?" presentations, and one person at a time, and we spread it out over the year. Took a half an hour to talk about their life, their childhood, their ancestors, pictures of their family, and to tell their family story, and to focus on the things that they would pretty much never say in the course of an intense work week. And we really got to see a whole other side of individuals, and the intent there was really to make sure that everybody was fully seen, so that they could be heard differently. And we're still doing it. So on the workplace, the participatory democracy, it began for me when I worked in the food cooperative movement back in the 1980s, and those were consumer owned. And the theme there was food for people, not for profit. And so from the earliest of work experiences, I was in kind of collective situations where decisions were made by consensus. And that's where I got my heaviest dose of workplace democracy. And it was in a very, very spirited environment. There was tremendous passion. And in large part, it was a good experience. But the food cooperatives in those days also had to learn about competition the hard way, because food co-ops were kind of part of the inventing force of the natural foods and the organic industry. But also what was springing up all around us were all kinds of private natural food companies, including Whole Foods, at exactly the same time. And I found that the way we practiced workplace democracy, there was so much emphasis on the democracy part of it, and that we actually, I think, didn't pay heed to the competitive workplace part of it, and we made our workplaces weaker than they might have been all at the same time. So when we started Equal Exchange, we set it up as a worker-owned democracy, and we found a way to capitalize it with money from the outside while giving workers 100% of the voting control, even though that we owned only 8% of the actual capital it took to run the business. And that really changed my view of worker participation. And to this day, I kind of feel most proud of that piece of the Equal Exchange structure. And the structure still holds there. Equal Exchange is 31 years old, and it has 150 employees, and something like 125 of them are worker owners. So when we started Red Tomato, we had to then kind of reinvent a nonprofit version of that. And so we put the emphasis, because we don't have owners, economic owners per se, but we tried to build a structure where there was a lot of participation in how we run meetings and in how the management team relates to those who aren't on it. And I think what we've added at Red Tomato is trying to always wrestle with the balance between the principles of participation and the need to make this darn experiment work economically for the growers that we represent. And so we kind of inject a high dose of practicality and feel like that's where we struggle with the tension between everyone involved, all hands on deck in the decision and planning process. How do you balance experience versus training of emerging leaders? And we're working hard at that.
Can I add something to that? I would say just from Red Tomato that the workplace democracy very much looks at everybody is at the table, and we try and manage our information as transparently as possible. So our management team agendas are public to the staff. We have open books clearly across the staff and the board. but the question of decision making, I think, is a good one, because we do have some hierarchy in our decision making, and I think it can be unclear for folks what their role is at the table and how that informs the decision or the decision maker. So one of the most important things that I learned from watching Michael as a leader was that if the decision maker is publicly willing to be proven wrong, and that is not a personal affront, that if the conversation around the table informs the decision maker and changes an opinion, that's a successful process. And that sort of lack of ego and non-attachment to the decision itself, I think, should empower people to participate in the conversation differently.
Thank you, Laura. Ernest, you had touched on that a little bit in your presentation, just about holding each other accountable and shared decision making. Is there anything you want to add from your point of view?
Yeah, I mean, to give an example, our current executive director has a Juris Doctorate, and our previous one had no degree whatsoever. And so to really be, a democracy, you have to include everybody's opinion. And here that's part of that ecosystem of opportunity that we want to create in the workplace, not just in the community, but in our workplace. And, to be really, really inclusive with every person that's involved in this organization, even to some of our partners. And so just because, you have a degree, doesn't mean you know everything either. But I think for the most part, we really try to include everybody's voice in that sense.
Thank you. We got some really great questions in the questions box. So I've got one here from Hilda, who says, conceptually, she really likes the idea of supporting individuals' growth within the organization. But one of the things that she struggles with is that people gain so many skills and perspectives from working in multiple organizations. How do you deal with this issue? How do you build people's capacity in a competitive nonprofit environment? Michael, you had kind of touched on that, like if you didn't provide opportunity to the superstars within your staff, that you were going to maybe lose them. So maybe that's the flip side of that coin, in really needing to provide a ladder for growth to employees, or you might lose them in this competitive environment.
Yes, which is, at some level, that's inevitable. But I actually think this goes to one of Laura's strengths, which was a super intentional approach to cross training and capacity building, and because when we did this transition, it's such a common thing with a founder or an entrepreneurial approach, is that so much of what had been created lived up here and hadn't been yet set down in a way that was really could be institutionalized and easily trained and passed on. So I'm going to let Laura talk about what she then picked up as she tried to build a workforce that was much more durable and resilient.
Okay. I think definitely there are opportunities, there are ways to create opportunity for the staff inside of the capacity of our organization, and we're a 9-person organization, and we have, our budget is what it is, so sometimes we are able to build people up and send them up the ladder, and sometimes it has to do with sitting down and really understanding what that person's goals are and what work they want to do, and knowing that Red Tomato might not be their final destination, but what can we do to invest in them as a person and as a leader in this movement, and also to benefit Red Tomato at the same time. And that tends to be how I work with the folks that I supervise. Just who do you want to be and where do you want to go? Asking the same questions that Michael asked me, and looking for lots of opportunities inside of our work to help them build their skill sets. And that always benefits Red Tomato, and it should benefit our movement, whether they stay or find a way to grow up the ladder here. So it always feels like a both and. But we're investing in the people who work for Red Tomato, both for our organizational benefit and to invest in them as people that we care about and want to see successful in their careers.
Thank you. Tamira has a question here for Ernest or for everyone. And she said that she loved what you said about leadership being committed to change. She works at a founder-led organization, and change is not an embraced value at the executive level, which leaves staff feeling very frustrated. Any advice for middle management or creating culture where change can happen when the executives are not on board? Oh, I think a lot of people can relate to that question.
Ernest.
Can you repeat? You cut out just a little bit towards the middle.
Oh, I'm sorry. It's a comment and a question about being at an organization where change is not embraced by the executive leadership, and seeking advice for staff who are maybe more middle management that want to create some culture change, but don't have the executive leadership on board.
Oh, wow. That's a tough one there.
mean,
Get out of there. No, I'm kidding.
It would be
I think it's
interesting.
so common.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to know. I'm guessing that the question of change is focused internally rather than externally, programmatically. And I think that's a very hard place to be, so there's no sugarcoating that, but that there are often good business cases for investing in a positive workplace culture. So whether that's about profitability or impact from a nonprofit perspective, as we've been working on our vacation policies and our benefits package and how we do our employee evaluations, all of those are tools to reinforce a positive workplace culture that enable people to feel more empowered, they're more productive. So I think, if the leadership is prone to looking at the bottom line or some sort of business case for investing in organizational culture, there's quite a wealth of resources out there that can help you make the case that this isn't just about a social hour after work or more vacation time for your staff, but it should result in positive results for the organization. So I would look for cases like that.
Mm.
You guys, the other two, have some thoughts on that?
I think coming from my perspective, I don't think I'm not middle management, but my supervisor, he'll go to bat for his employees. And to have a strong supervisor, if you're a supervisor yourself, those are real hard conversations to have. But to really have those conversations with your colleagues and to create a dialogue, I think having a simple conversation, changed a lot for us here at Thunder Valley. To have dialogue and to have meaningful conversation, whether or not your leadership's on board, that's tough. That's a tough spot to be. But I think for the most part, if you create a dialogue with as much people as you can, and have these hard conversations in these spaces, that'll start to create change.
I was just thinking about how people describe farmers a lot of times as conservative and stuck in the mud. But I know when you bring a group of farmers over to another farm and show them a different way of doing something that they can see happening right in front of their very eyes and coming out of the mouth of another grower, magic can really happen. And I was just imagining that scenario that this questioner described does feel like a dangerous place to be. But I was imagining that if I would imagine that the questioners are not only going to be not part of the executive, they're probably younger too, and that there's somehow, if a model can be, if the executive can be asked and shown how, it's kind of what Laura was saying, if they can be shown how there's a different road to the same goals that they care about. In other words, I think if you're asking them to change either their mission or their that's like, wow, nearly. But if it's really about the path and the way and the human relationships and if it can be shown to lead to the same results or better results, with a tangible example, maybe there's a chance.
And it takes, culture change takes a lot of time. So I think making sure that you're talking about incremental steps and trying to garner commitment to stick with it, even if it feels difficult or uncomfortable or whatnot. And that might be something management could be resistant to. But I think making it really clear that anytime you dip a toe into trying to change culture, that is a long-term horizon you're operating on.
I think too, to add from my personal experiences, you teach people how to treat you, and that comes with setting boundaries. And I've recently had to do that myself, and I taught a supervisor how not to treat me and what I was going to tolerate, and the reaction was interesting. And I think a part of it came from miscommunication. A part of it came from them thinking me as a program coordinator was questioning their authority, when in fact, I wanted to re-empower and re-energize our program and look at the mission and make sure we're still aligned with that. So with me asking questions, came to me challenging their authority, when in fact, I was just saying, we need to look at our mission, and I think, we need to get back over here on track. But I think a lot of that too comes with miscommunication, and one thing could be misconstrued as something else.
Yeah, thank you. You guys, I'm looking at the clock and realizing that we have 2 minutes left, and I'm like, oh, I wish we had 20 more minutes, because there's still some great questions here, and I think so much more that we can discuss. But just really want to thank you all for your insight and your input. I think particularly on that last question, really had some good examples there. One thing that I was thinking is, we can influence where we are. And so if we can shift culture, even just within, in the way that you're saying, Ernest, between one-on-one in one relationship, and then that can build out from where we are. I think that's, sometimes the most power that we have is just in our direct relationships and influencing culture there. Just really want to appreciate our speakers today and our participants. Thank you all for spending time with us today. The Farm Bill is really fast approaching, and so just really wanted to put a plug out there to please reach out to NSAC and find out what the key talking points are at this moment. It's like day-to-day changes. I can't even keep up. But a lot of the programs that are important to us, that are really supporting our missions and our communities, are on the chopping block. So please, get over to NSAC and take action today. So that's all, folks. Please be sure to fill out the survey as you close out, and don't forget to register for the next episode on September 4th. Thank you again, Ernest, Laura, and Michael, for joining us today. Really appreciate you and all the insight that you shared. So much respect to all, and everybody have a great day.